Chapter 5 dealt with nonverbal communication. These are some things you need to be aware of from Chapter 5. First of all, you need to know what is nonverbal communication. What is not nonverbal communication? We talked a lot about, whether it was intended to be sent or the message that was received and all of that. And we talked about various things that can be nonverbal communication, but what is not nonverbal communication? What doesn't qualify for nonverbal communication? I want to ask you a question about that, and you need to be able to recognize it. You need to be able to focus on some of the ways that help us increase our accuracy of interpretation in nonverbal communication. Things like baseline behaviors. What does that mean? How does that impact our interpretive ability? You need to understand the things that nonverbal communication can do. A nonverbal message can undermine or contradict what you really want to convey. And so you need to look at, there's a whole section in Chapter 5 that deals with these impacts of nonverbal communication. You need to be familiar with them. What are the things that nonverbal communication is good at? What does it communicate well? Things like initial impressions, relational information, emotional expression. Those are things that are very easily communicated and communicated very effectively through nonverbal communication. I'm also going to ask you a question about kinesics. And kinesics have to do with gesture, body movement, and kinetic things. That's what the word kinesic comes from, kinetics, moving. And so you're going to, we talked about, if I was talking about something that had a curvy surface, and I might make that's a kinesic motion, or this is a kinesic motion. So we talked about some of that, those things that I do that help shape, that I do with my hands. Those are nonverbal communications. They are kinetic, they're gestures and body movements. What does it mean to accent your communication? When I get to the most important part and I either get a little louder or I pause for effect, that's an accent. You need to be able to answer some questions about verbal accents. I guess what I'm getting around to is you need to know a little bit about kinesics. You need to know a little bit about proxemics. Proxemics is the study of space and territories. And we talked a lot about space and territories in Chapter 5. You need to know about chronemics. That has to do with the way we experience time and what paralanguage is. The kind of cues that would be classified as paralanguage. We use and all to fill in and make pauses and to fill in silent spaces. You need to be able to identify the different kinds of territory and what they are. We have public territory, home territory, body territory. If you had a clubhouse in your backyard when you were a kid, what kind of territory is that clubhouse? You also need to understand the way that territories are encroached on. What's the difference between contamination and violation? Whenever somebody comes into your space and they deface it, maybe write graffiti on the church, tag it with spray paint, that is a defacing of your space, and that is a contamination. You also need to understand the function of dress as a nonverbal communication. Dress, the clothes you wear provide comfort and protection. They give a cultural display of status. They tell people who you are and what you are. They also portray modesty, and that's very important to us as apostolics. So you need to be able to recognize what the major functions of dress are in nonverbal communication. The unique thing about nonverbal communication is that it can be universal. There are some things that are understood across the borders of culture and time and space. Almost every culture understands what this means. And so there are certain gestures and certain movements that transcend language, and they're nonverbal communication. We can convey things that with people we can't talk with any other way. But now there are also some of those communications that don't translate well. Sometimes a gesture doesn't mean what you think it means. It may mean something different in one culture than it does in your culture. But it's important to understand that nonverbal behaviors can both be universal and be exclusive. And I'm gonna ask you a question that relates to that. Responsiveness. What is responsiveness? What does it tell me? What does responsiveness convey to me as both a speaker or a listener? So that wraps it up. I hope that this has been helpful to you. I hope that I have conveyed some of the information you need to know for the test. I really want you to be successful. I really want you to excel. And it's very important that these are just two chapters. They're not real deep chapters, but there's a lot of information there. And so I've tried to kind of weed out and focus in on certain things that you need to be aware of for this test. God bless you. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you next week.